Welcome to a Homegrown Family Podcast, where we grow the produce and the kids. Welcome to this introductory episode. I am Joe Mettler, your podcast host. First off, let's talk a little bit about me. I grew up on a farm in central Minnesota, more of a hobby farm, but we grew many different animals and were pretty much a self-sustaining operation. My dad started off dairy farming, transitioned into raising beef cattle, where we harvested a lot of hay and occasionally had corn go through a picker for feed. Being raised on a farm, we were basically self-sustaining. We had our own pigs, chickens, geese, cows, a whole vegetable garden, the whole works. Anytime Mom went to the store, it was always to purchase random things that the farm couldn't provide. After high school, I went to NDSU, where I obtained a crop and weed science degree, and along with a degree in natural resource management and a minor in soil science. From there, I worked for a company based out of Montana, but I worked remotely over in Oregon on the Indian Reservation, the Warm Springs Indian Reservation, where I did rangeland surveying to determine the amount of livestock that could be put on this reservation based upon the amount of forage that was available. So I was out there forage sampling, counting grasses, taking a look at the grazability of the land. From there, I went over to Washington, over in Yakima, where I started off as a scout and worked my way to an independent crop consultant, agronomist, where I worked in a variety of different crops, anywhere from hops, cherries, blueberries, quite an assortment of crops. From there, I moved over to Fairbanks, Alaska, where I worked as a co-manager on an organic vegetable farm. I worked as a soil conservation district personnel, working with different restoration projects for stream banks, worked with lawn and garden fertilizer applications, and then I also worked as a substitute teacher while I was in Alaska. And then I moved back home towards the Midwest, and I also substitute taught there for a while. I came back full circle back to NDSU, where I now currently work as a research specialist or an assistant weed scientist, where I work in crops, primarily wheat. I work in barley a little bit, sunflowers, canola, flax, where I primarily do research in herbicide applications and herbicide efficacy, and sometimes crop tolerance trials. Basically, miniature farming. And while I was at NDSU there, I obtained my master's degree in plant sciences. And for that degree, I worked primarily with industrial hemp and different herbicides that could be utilized or pursued towards herbicide registration. And so that kind of just gives you a background of where I'm at, what my expertise is. I could say I'm a plant nerd, plant doctor. I like to tell my wife because she's in the medical field. But so I know how to make things grow, help things grow. And in all these different states that I lived in, I've always had a garden. I've always gotten into different homegrown activities such as beekeeping. I learned how to make my own beer, wine, and cider. Did all my own gardening. Quite a few different things that I've picked up in my travels. So in this podcast, I'm looking at a homegrown family. And so the first component being homegrown. Basically, we're going to talk about anything under the sun. Things that I participated in, currently do, my hobbies, around the idea of homegrown or homesteading. We're going to talk about maple syrup. We're going to talk about mushroom hunting. We're going to talk about vegetable gardening. We're going to talk about the orchard that my family has on their farm. How we raise and cultivate grapes and apples and ultimately make hard cider with, or just juice it for, fresh drinkable juice. So we're going to talk about all these different things, all these different topics. And then the other component of it is family. So homegrown family. So at this point in this podcast, you get to meet my wife and my family, and we'll talk about how we raise our children, how we parent, and kind of roll that into homeschooling. We are not experts in this topic. We only have almost a 2-year-old, so pretty limited experience in terms of parents. So in this component of my podcast, we're going to look more into this journey together. We're going to live and learn with each other. We're going to talk about things that we did that we think work really well. It's not going to work for all families or for all children. or for all parents. And so we're going to talk about different things that worked, different things that didn't, what's working well for us, why we're choosing, classical versus maybe Montessori education for our child, things like that nature. So there's going to be a mixed bag of different homegrown family type of activities. My motivation for this podcast, I guess, I'm not here to teach you guys a bunch of different things. Yeah, I just want to share some of my knowledge. It makes me feel good, sure. But ultimately, I kind of want to have a record for something that my children or grandchildren can look at in the future and say, hey, Grandpa Joe, did you know that he was a beekeeper? Did you know that he made his own wine? And for them to go back and look at my life. So this podcast is also going to kind of circulate or evolve around my story. How did I get to these different states? How did I have these different jobs? And so forth. And part of that story is my Catholic faith. So to be upfront, some of these episodes are going to include, deeper conversions into my faith, or life struggles, but my faith helped me through those struggles. And so there's going to be times in which my Catholic faith comes into discussion in these podcasts. And so just to let you know, that's probably going to happen. I don't intend this to be a podcast that's going to be focused on theology, of the Catholic faith. If people have questions about some things, maybe I'll entertain those topics. But I don't intend this to be a Catholic-based podcast. We're working on the homegrown family, and faith is a component to that, but will not be a focus in this podcast. At least I don't intend it to be. That being said, too, if anybody has any questions, please email me at ahomegrownfam@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at the same domain, ahomegrownfam. And so please join us in this adventure. Yeah, in fact, email me right now after this introductory episode. Let me know what topics I mentioned that you're really excited to hear about. Let me know what type of topics you think would fall in the category of a homegrown family. I'd like to definitely be of service to you guys, to share my knowledge, to share my expertise, to share my life story, my adventure in this podcast. So, yeah, feel free to reach out. I will post another episode here shortly. I hope to put out a podcast weekly for you guys. Sometimes life happens, you have a big family event going on, and a podcast just doesn't happen. I'm shooting for weekly, but occasionally, I might skip an episode here or there to focus on family, birthday parties, anniversary parties, whatever's going on that might take up more time in my week, because family is important, and you need to focus on that. With this podcast also, though, I think my family will get a lot closer, at least especially my wife and I, as we go into this homeschooling component. She'll be a big factor in that podcast development there. And so I'm looking forward to that, to having those types of conversations, which we don't always set aside for each other. So this will be really good for the growth of my marriage and with my wife. So, yeah, looking forward to it all. Yeah, I think that's it. See you next time.